Hey, it's Tom, and today we have a care video for the Rhipsalis baccifera, otherwise known as the Mistletoe Cactus. I've had this in my collection for quite a few years now. It doesn't particularly stand out, perhaps, compared to some of my other houseplants, but it is steady. It just ticks along. It was a lot smaller than this when I first got it, and it just grows slowly and surely. It just keeps growing, and it's unassuming, I suppose, and I like that. I do like sometimes a house plant that just looks good. It doesn't necessarily have to dominate a space, but it doesn't need much in return. And I quite like this. We have a mutual understanding, I believe, is probably the sort of way to look at this. It grows well and happily, and I look after it with a basic level of care, which we're going to go through in this video. I'll tell you what I do and how they perform at their best. So it's also, as you might be able to gather, it's a hanging plant, so I have it pretty high up and it hangs down, which is great. I do like some vertical height with my houseplants sometimes. I don't always want them to be on the table or sort of eye level. It's nice to have something in the corners. And yes, it's just dropped some segments, which is what I would say is its biggest weakness and what it's most known for. We're going to cover why that happens in this video. Okay, so let's take a look at light first of all. So these Rhipsalis plants are related to cacti. However, unlike their cousins, which enjoy intense bright sunlight, this is a jungle cacti. It needs a little bit less light. It wants a little bit lower levels. Not low light, but it definitely does not want intense full sunlight. If you do that, if it is a position in a really sunny spot, which this one is not, by the way, but part of the segments will go red. Okay, so they would change color, a stress response to the intensity of the light. They don't want that, it's too much for them. In their natural habitat, they grow in jungles and they are shielded by canopies. So they have filtered light, possibly bright light, but sometimes a little bit lower, medium light levels. That's what filters through and that's what they receive. And that is what they want in your home as well. So you need to try to replicate that as best as possible. Now, this plant can actually deal with pretty low light levels, surprisingly, but it's not happy with that position. It will cope with it for a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months, and then it has the dreaded segment drop, and the segments come off, they fall off. It's not happy, it doesn't like it, it wants more light. Don't do it. I'm laughing because you're going to hear this a lot in this video, because when this plant is unhappy, it tells you it's not happy, and it will shred, and the segments just fall off. However, if you can give it like medium light levels, it's going to be fine. And it will grow along at a steady clip, not too fast. It's not the fastest growing plant ever, but it's not the slowest either. So it's faster than a normal cacti, but not as fast as maybe a sort of like a tropical plant, like a monstera, something like that. It doesn't grow quite as fast as that, but it's steady. Watering it, I would classify this plant as a Goldilocks plant. It doesn't want to be drenched. It doesn't want to be completely dry either. It wants the middle ground. So I found the best way to treat this plant in terms of watering is, I want to say little and often, and that's probably accurate to a large extent. I do water a lot less in winter when it's colder and there's less light around. It does need a lot less water at that time of the year, but otherwise, for pretty much the rest of the year, it's little and often. And that just basically means I use my little watering can, and I go over it. I'm not drenching the soil. I'm not. A lot of people will water their plants completely soak it until the water pours out the bottom. I don't do that, especially not with my mistletoe cactus. It's too much, and that will be a prime risk factor for overwatering, especially in a normal home. That it's just not the same sort of jungle vibe. It doesn't have the air circulation. It doesn't have the heat. So you are going to risk an overwatering situation. So little and often is what I would recommend you do. Temperature needs are quite straightforward as well. It needs a warm location. They can cope with a little bit of a cooler spot. You could put it in an unheated conservatory or sort of a greenhouse or something, but it needs to not experience anything close to freezing temperatures. So again, it's going to depend where you are in the world and what setup you have in your own individual growing environment. But freezing needs to be avoided. But yeah, realistically, it wants a nice, warm temperature. Think of a jungle. Think of a tropical, humid, and generally all all year round warm temperature. That's ideally what you're trying to aim for. So somewhere warm. In terms of feeding, they're not particularly heavy feeders. They do not require excessive amounts of fertilizer. Once every 2 months, I have a splurge where I go around and pretty much do all my houseplants, and this one is included. So every couple of months is when I tend to feed. It's just a general houseplant fertilizer is what I use. They do enjoy reasonably high humidity levels if you can provide that. If you can't, it probably isn't a deal breaker. I'd say as long as you're above 50% for pretty much most of the year, you should be all right. If you start to drop below that, you may notice. Actually, no, you don't notice segment drops with low humidity. You notice brown ends, and the segments go brown and they stay in place, but they go brown. This plant just gets moved around, okay? So you might have been able to gather from my introduction that it kind of struggles to find a place where I really want it. I do like it and I do move it around and I definitely want to keep it, but it tends to move home a few times a year. So sometimes it's not quite happy and I'll move it somewhere else and that's my fault. And I do feel a bit guilty. It doesn't like being some of the places I choose for it, is what I'm going to say here. But if you can get around 50% plus, you probably won't have to do anything additionally. If you go below 50, it might still be okay, depending on your circumstances, depending on the setup and various growing conditions. But if you start to notice a lot of browning on the ends and stuff, then it is a classic sign that the humidity level is too low and you either need to move it somewhere else or find ways to boost that humidity level. So repotting and potting mix. They do not need to be repotted very often. The root system on these is very superficial. They are epiphytes in their natural habitat. They just don't have a great deal of root, and that transitions also into ones that you grow in a potting mix like this. So the root system just isn't robust. It takes a very long time to fill its space. You can get an idea of how big the plant is relative to the pot. It's still got a way to go. I won't look to repot this now for at least another year or so. Realistically, maybe every couple of years when the potting mix starts to break down, it's probably when you're looking to do it. It's not in any urgent hurry, so you don't need to be doing it that often. As for the potting mix you want to use, they're really versatile. A lot of people will tell you that you should only use a free draining mix, like for cacti and succulent, but you can do that. Of course you can, but they don't require it. This is actually, it looks like just an everyday potting compost mix. I don't think there's any amendments in here. I can't see any grit or any stones or anything like that. And it's fine, as you can see. And it's been fine like this for many, many years. So you don't have to use a succulent mix for these plants. They don't mind. They're really adaptable. So take your pick, basically. You can propagate these plants if you would like to do so. It's very easy, very straightforward. You can take some of the segments and pop them on a potting mix and they root really easily. For a head start, quite often I will show you some photos. I can see it happening now, but you'll never see it on the camera, so I'll show you some footage. But sometimes when the roots are still attached and they're growing, they will produce roots ready and they can be rooted straight away into a potting mix. So it's already given you the head start. It wants to be propagated. Those segments, they want to drop and they want to spread. Normally I talk about problem issues towards the end of the videos, and I don't really have much to say. I've kind of covered them as we've talked. So I suppose a quick recap. If you see a lot of redness on the stems, it's a sign of too much light. If the segments are dropping on a regular basis, that could be a lot of different factors. We're talking not enough light is probably the reason that would happen. That mostly that would happen. It can also happen from lack of water, but that's unusual. Normally you'll get the stems can be wrinkled and they just look very flat and there's a washed out appearance, which is normally the sign of underwatering. But equally, segments could drop if the plant is underwatered. If you don't feed them, then you may get a similar sort of scenario where segments would drop. That's, again, we're going to move down the scale of less likely, so it's less likely to happen. And overwatering can potentially do that as well, but that's really unlikely. When you overwater these plants, what's going to happen is you'll get yellowing. You'll get large sections coming up, but they'll be yellow rather than just dried out and almost like they've been underwatered. So you will get an overwatering situation is quite distinctive to underwatering. You should be able to tell the difference by looking at the plant, and should tell you the difference there. We've covered the brown tips, which is typically a low humidity problem. Sometimes the stems will go brown naturally just from old age. It's not necessarily a sign of a problem. Just keep an eye on things. If you see a lot of it happening, it could be an issue. Pests. I have not had, I'm just trying to rack my brains, but no, I've had no pests on these plants. However, I have heard that people have had mealybugs, which are a nightmare to get rid of sometimes. They're quite big, they're quite large, but they can be quite persistent, which is the problem with those, and they can create quite a lot of mess on the plant, especially a plant like this, where basically the problem with mealybugs is they produce like a sticky sap, and it's gross basically. But a lot of plants you can just wipe it off with a cloth and it's gone. But with these, it's going to be tricky to wipe this down. If you see what I mean, it's going to be hard to wipe these, and people just get tired of it and they just throw the plant out. So don't do that. Persevere. You can get rid of them. You can clean the plant. You can, get rid of the mess. So don't. I just can't bear to see a plant just go because of a pest when you can treat them and you can get rid of the after effects. So bear with it and keep going. Okay, so I think I'm going to wrap now at this point because I've covered pretty much everything. Short and simple. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.